What's going on, you guys? So we're about a week out from the highly anticipated fight, Crawford versus Canelo. And I've done quite a bit of videos on this fight. If you guys follow this channel, I'm picking Crawford to win this fight. Last week I had posted a video talking about Terence Crawford possibly getting the stoppage, in this upcoming fight, against a sturdy Canelo Alvarez, right? A Canelo Alvarez we, over the years have only seen hurt really one time. And that was years and years ago when he had fought Miguel Cotto's brother, right? So I can understand why a lot of people may be surprised, hearing that. I think Canelo could possibly get stopped, right? Just based on, his track record. And like I said, you've only seen him hurt one time. And he's been in the ring with some pretty big guys, some pretty big punchers. But like I said in my last week's video, sometimes it's the punches that these guys don't see coming that is able to get him up out of there, right? And if you look at Crawford's, career, oftentimes when, he gets his opponent out of there, stops him, it's usually a punch they don't see coming. And if you were to go down the line of, Canelo's resume, you can't really think of too many guys who, possess the same punching ability of a Terence Crawford, the counter punching ability specifically. Floyd Mayweather is one of them, right? But aside from that, you had Lara, you had some guys on there, but if you were to go pound for pound, I don't think those guys were bigger punchers than Terence Crawford. And I am completely understanding that Terence Crawford is moving up all these divisions, and taking on Canelo at possibly his best weight class of his career, right? Canelo started off at 154 and he's gone all the way up to 175, and he's handled a lot of the guys that he's fought. But like I had mentioned, I think Terence Crawford, what he's great at, is landing some shots that you don't necessarily see coming. Oftentimes he may set it up, through the course of a fight, not necessarily throw his hardest shots, but, wait for the opportunity to land something more meaningful later on in the fight. Perfect example was David Avanesian, right? And I know David Avanesian is not a Canelo Alvarez, right? I'm not trying to compare the two. But if you watch that fight, he set that shot, that combination up, for a couple rounds, he was waiting to land that shot. But all in all, man, as I look at this fight, like I stated, I'm leaning more toward a potential Crawford stoppage. Now, if he doesn't get the stoppage, I still think he's going to win this fight. And I think he's going to win the fight convincingly, right? And the reason for that, as I stated in past videos, I think Crawford's skill set, if you were to look at the things that could give Canelo Alvarez some problems, obviously educated feet, right? Crawford's known to not necessarily be a mover, quote unquote run in any of his fights, right? He's often likes to engage into, back and forth exchanges, or he just likes to fight. But if you really paid attention to the Errol Spence fight, very similar to a Canelo Alvarez, right? Not saying he's the same exact fighter as Canelo Alvarez, that Errol Spence, but how they set some of their shots up is very similar. If you look, they're both come forward pressure style type fighters, and they often rely upon a double or triple jab to set up a big overhand loop and shot, or a big, loop and shot to the body. For Errol Spence, is the big over-the-top left hand or a left hand to the body. For Canelo, it's the big over-the-top right hand or right hand to the body, right? And this is the Canelo we've seen now for really since he's moved up to 168. But he's used to be more so a counter puncher, I guess you could classify him as a boxer puncher, but over the years he's become more of a pressure style type of fighter. But as I see that fight, the Errol Spence Terence Crawford fight, I see some things that he could take into the Canelo Alvarez fight, right? The first being the footwork. the lateral movement, and it's not running. It's just educated feet, knowing when to move at the right time, right? When to separate, you know, get some space in between the shots, in between exchanges, when to leave, you know, leave the pocket, you know, after throwing some shots. But on top of it too, in that fight, he showed a very strong lead hand, right? If you recall, like, during that fight, he was landing his power jab a majority of that fight, and you can argue that was probably the most effective thing he did in the fight, was have that jab constantly in Earl Spence's face, right? And it was a power jab. Those, after a while, those shots are starting to hurt, right? And in the second round, he dropped him, you know, with a straight right hand from the southpaw stance. So when I look at Canelo Alvarez, some of the guys that have given him difficulties were guys with good lead hands. Dimitri Bivol is a perfect example. For both have an educated feet and a strong lead hand, right? Floyd Mayweather, throughout the course of that fight, was landing constant right hands, but he was also landing his jab very well. And if you look at the Triple G fights, Triple G, you know, a big power puncher, you know, not necessarily has the same exact hand speed as any one of these guys I just mentioned, but he has a good solid jab, right? A good rangefinder, a good shot to, you know, keep his opponent at bay, you know, maybe disrupt some rhythm of a Canelo Alvarez, because Canelo Alvarez is a rhythm type of fighter. But all in all, those are the two main things I could see Crawford using in this fight that could be successful and give him success throughout the course of the fight. But the other thing that, you know, I now am noticing, and this is kind of something I've already noticed, but Canelo Alvarez obviously isn't a super big guy in terms of height, right? I think Crawford might be even an inch taller than he is, and I know he has a reach advantage over Canelo, but Canelo is the more sturdy, durable guy at the weight class that we've seen, right? He's fought at these heavier weights. He's more comfortable at the weight class, right? Crawford's never fought there. But if you look at these pictures that were just recently posted, Terence Crawford looks like he's in dog shape at 168, right? And we're a week away from this fight, but usually when you see guys come up in these weight classes and stuff like that, that aren't naturally big, you know, but they're, you know, trying to gain weight to, you know, make weight and things like that, their bodies don't necessarily look as trim as they do at the lower weights after moving up, right? They often may look blown up. You look at a Mikey Garcia was never really a, you know, a bigger, you know, muscular guy for any of the weight classes he was in. But when he moved up to 147 to fight Spence, he looked very flabby. Just didn't look right at the weight class, right? And there's been a number of guys throughout the course of, you know, the history of the sport that have ballooned up in weight and just didn't look the same physically, nor did they look the same in the ring. But as far as the eye test goes, physically, Crawford looks in really good shape. It looks like he's fit pretty well so far into the new weight, right? And maybe this just kind of does go to show that, hey, Crawford really cut down a lot of weight in order to make these 135, 140, 147, 154, right? I think what we've seen in these pictures really is that Terence Crawford naturally is a pretty big guy, right? He still has his abs, he still has cut, you know, and all of his muscle definition, right? He looks good at 168 so far, and I know we're a week out. I'm sure he's probably weighing even a little bit more than that right now. Some things I've read that he's really weighing like 175 right now, but he's completely ripped. So it's just kind of funny thinking that throughout all these years, as he's moved up in weight classes, you know, especially when he moved up to 147, you know, all the premier welterweights at that time were saying that Terence Crawford was too small, right? Keith Thurman was saying it, you know, a lot of the 147 pounders, Earl Spence, they all thought, well, he needs to do something at 147, and this is a different animal here at 147 than at 140, right? And we saw what he did to the welterweight division when he was there, right? It kind of just goes to show that, hey, man, maybe he was a quote-unquote weight bully, and maybe he's just been a naturally big guy this whole time, and he's just really killed himself to get down to these weight classes. So I don't know. Part of me is thinking, hey, is Terence Crawford going to possibly be the stronger of the two, right? Maybe not necessarily the harder puncher. But another thing I'm thinking too is we've never seen Canelo Alvarez, right, use his size or the weight discrepancy to bully his opponents, right? I understand Charlo was a bigger, taller guy. Let's just say taller. Canelo was more stout at the weight class. He definitely looked stronger of the two. But you didn't necessarily see him bully Charlo. Nor during his days at 154 was he bullying anybody, right? You didn't see him physically just outmuscle Amir Khan at a catch weight of 155. You never see him outmuscle a Liam Smith, right? A Miguel Cotto. Canelo Alvarez is more of a mid-range fighter. You know, he's not, you never really see him mix it up too often inside, you know, in the pocket, you know, at close quarters. He likes to fight his fights at the mid-range. So as I look at Crawford, Crawford is a very good inside fighter. And I know a lot of people give him flack for his performance at 154 with Madrimov, but I was actually kind of impressed with that performance. It wasn't his best, but he's fighting an undefeated champion, a young undefeated champion, at a new weight class, first fight at the weight class. And I didn't see at any point in that fight Madrimov really outmuscle him. In fact, I saw Terence Crawford be the one pushing him around the ring. There was a few exchanges in that fight where, you know, Crawford would land something meaningful and Madrimov would hold on to him, right? And there was other times when within an exchange, Crawford would land some body shots and then push Madrimov out of the way, kind of just throw him around, right? So as we go into this Canelo Alvarez fight, I'm starting to think that he may be the, you know, physically stronger of the two. Maybe not the bigger puncher, but maybe there's going to be some times during this fight where Terence Crawford is actually being the bully in this fight. You know, kind of pushing Canelo around, right? You know, in the clinch, is he going to be the stronger of the two pushing Canelo back? Is he going to be, you know, the guy really at times bringing the fight to Canelo and making him uncomfortable? I don't know. So I could see that being the case. I could see that happening. But we really don't know until they get in there, right? I still am leaning toward Crawford winning this fight without a doubt. But I also am still thinking it's very possible that he gets him out of there. And like I touched on in the previous videos, Canelo doesn't have the best gas tank in the sport, right? He can go 12 rounds. But when you're in there with a fighter like a Terence Crawford, I think he sees the holes in Canelo's game. You know, attack the body, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things that, you know, is a big factor in this fight. I think Terence Crawford, his best bet is to go to the body of a Canelo, similar to like we've seen with a Munguia or a Bivol, right? We don't really see too many fighters ever go to his body. But in the times that we have seen it, you know, I think has been effective. And I'm not arguing that Munguia won the fight, right? A lot of people want to say that, you know, based off some stuff I say, that I'm like almost insinuating that Munguia won this fight. I don't think so at all. But I do think he did some good work. I think he probably was just a little bit inexperienced and didn't know when to really step up on the gas, you know, at times where I felt like he could have, you know, and possibly could have done even more damage to Canelo during that fight. We saw a Canelo that was fading late, right? And obviously I know that's common. These guys are going to be fighting as the fight goes on. They're going to get a little bit more tired. But I just think at times when Munguia didn't know when to put his, you know, foot on the gas pedal, I think those were opportunities where Terence Crawford will capitalize on those things. You know, seeing that a Canelo is, you know, kind of fading right before us, I think as the time goes on during the fight, as it gets later on, I think Terence Crawford, you know, will step it up. And that's when I think we can see a potential stoppage. I don't see him knocking him out with like a single punch, you know. I see it being more of an accumulation of shots, getting him late, getting him while he's, you know, tired. I think the body work is the key to that stoppage, right? But overall, man, I'm just really excited to see this fight. It was cool seeing the, countdown to Canelo Crawford, show on Netflix. It does show that Canelo Alvarez is also taking this fight very serious. We always know that Crawford comes into every fight to win, as does Canelo. So I think all in all, we'll get a good fight. I just think that we're going to see something that's going to surprise a lot of people. For me, myself, I'm not necessarily going to be super surprised that he beats a Canelo Alvarez. I'm not going to be super surprised if he stops him. I think it is surprising, just because everyone that Canelo's fought really hasn't been able to hurt him, right? So I think that's definitely going to be surprising to a lot of people. But as time goes on, man, I think we're starting to see more and more people kind of pick Crawford going into this thing. But all in all, I'm excited. I can't wait to watch this fight. You got to give respect to both of these guys, right? Canelo has been one of the best fighters in the world for quite some time. I just think he hasn't been in there with somebody quite on Crawford's level in a while. And who knows, Crawford may be the very best fighter that Canelo has stepped in the ring with. Time will tell. We won't really know until they get into the ring. But all I can do is give you my prediction, give you what I think could potentially happen. But yeah, man, I'm leaning toward a Crawford. I just don't necessarily see how Canelo Alvarez can win this fight. I don't see at times how he can really break down a Terence Crawford, right? Yes, he can land some meaningful body shots, but I think Bud Crawford would literally have to stand right in front of him the whole entire night. Right? I don't think the weight issue is going to be a factor in this fight. I don't think Crawford's going to tire late. Like people are, that are picking Canelo Alvarez to win this fight. They're thinking that Canelo Alvarez, right, is just going to be too much for Terence Crawford. And that Terence Crawford, may have made too big of a jump here. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. So, and in terms of landing a big shot, he may land some big shots. But I do think that Crawford is a strong dude. I think he's going to be able to, take these punches well. But at the same time, he's not going to just be there to take punches. So, I don't know, man. I just don't see... I think this is a harder fight for Canelo than it is for Terence Crawford. Now, like I said, we don't know, but those are my thoughts on the fight, man. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys see Canelo Alvarez winning this fight, or do you see Terence Crawford winning this fight? Let me know. Hate, like, comment, subscribe.